And Avik Roy, who is former healthcare policy advisor to Mitt Romney's 2012 presidential campaign. He's now the president of the Foundation for Research on Equal Opportunity. And Avik, we know that there are a lot of negotiations that are taking place behind the scenes. We don't know exactly what this new bill might look like, but what's your best guess?
Hey, Becky. Well, I think what we know at this point is what moderates in the Republican Party are campaigning for is a preservation of a lot of Obamacare's regulations, particularly the regulations around pre-existing conditions. That's what they want. And what the Freedom Caucus wanted, the right wing of the Republican Party, is to actually deregulate the market so you can get lower premiums. So that's been the tug of war, and it looks like Mark Meadows, the chairman of the House Freedom Caucus, and Representative MacArthur, representing the Tuesday group, the GOP moderates, they've hashed out some sort of deal that would preserve some of these regulations in the ACA.
I mean, those are two very different viewpoints, two ways of kind of looking at the world. What would it mean? Would it mean more state rights to decide that they can or can't do some of these things?
Yeah, I would call it a little bit more state flexibility. And the thing that's really interesting about this, Becky, is that there was actually a deal on the table from the House Freedom Caucus that was more favorable to the moderates in terms of offering more generous subsidies to lower-income people so that fewer people would lose their health insurance under the new health reform plan from the Republicans. But what moderates really cared about was not the subsidies. They cared much more about the regulations, particularly this piece on pre-existing conditions. That tells you a bit about the politics of this, that protecting people against pre-existing conditions, that very popular piece of the law, was more important to GOP moderates than the overall policy goal of making sure that everybody has health insurance.
When we spoke with some of the House Freedom Caucus people, just as the last bill was kind of blowing up when they decided not to go ahead and bring it to the vote, maybe that day, there was this commentary. They were saying things like, look, this is the biggest piece of Republican welfare that I've ever seen. What moderated their tone with this and got them back to the table to the point where they were willing to negotiate? Because negotiation itself seemed like a dirty word. Was that partially President Trump putting some pressure on them? Was that their own constituents who said they need to go back to the table?
I think the House Freedom Caucus actually played an underappreciated and constructive role in all this. They went from saying no tax credits, no subsidies at all to help the uninsured get coverage. They now are saying, well, we're not thrilled about that, but what we're really going to focus on is deregulating the market so premiums are lower and more affordable for the people who need it. That's actually a more free market position, and I think they felt the pressure and the responsibility to say, okay, we know what we're against, what are we for? And I think they've really tried to figure out how do we get to yes, what are we for, what are we negotiating for? And I think they've moved a lot in a more constructive direction the last couple of weeks.
We have a very distinguished guest, the former chairman of the CEA, you know, like Stiglitz and Bernanke and Greenspan. In this case, it's Mr. Professor Austin Goldsmith is with it.
Hey, we know each other.
Okay. He referred to this latest thing as, he's so funny, son of Frankenstein. So the first one that they were trying to do was Frankenstein, and then this was son of Frankenstein. I misunderstood the notes. I thought you meant Obamacare was the original Frankenstein.
No, they're trying to regrow this thing, which was already dead.
Tell him we need to do something, though, right?
My question, Avik, is this. Even if they can agree in the House on a compromise, when they go to the Senate, don't they still need to get some Democrats on board to get to the 60-vote threshold? And aren't the Republican senators not fully on board with what's coming out of the House? How do you feel like that plays out?
Well, my personal view, Austin, is that a more bipartisan approach that would get 60 votes in the Senate would result in stronger and better policy. But Republicans have said, you know what, we don't think we have a willing partner on the other side for repealing and replacing Obamacare, which is understandable. And so they're going with this reconciliation process that requires only 50 votes in the Senate. Now, the problem with the reconciliation process is that you can only do fiscal policy through the reconciliation process, taxing, spending, things like that. You can't really do as much on the regulatory side. And it's the regulations in the ACA that need to be reformed or fixed in order to make the individual market for health insurance work better for the consumers who are priced out of it right now.
I want you to talk Austin into the notion that the status quo is unacceptable. I mean, isn't that where you are, Austin?
Well, look, there are things. My own position, and Avik and I have talked about this, and he has put forward thoughtful plans from a conservative point of view of ways that you could reform health care. They aren't the plans that Republicans are trying to push. If you want to tweak, improve, make better the healthcare system of the United States, we should be for that. Everybody should be for that. But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to fulfill a promise that they voted 65 times or whatever to repeal Obamacare, and they just want to find something that they can say, we did it.
Well, I mean, final thoughts on that. I want to hear your, I mean,
Yeah,
the
look,
status
I think
quo
there
is-
are ways to.
Yeah.
There are ways to get to reform. The 50-vote reconciliation threshold makes it hard. I hope Republicans will work more on the regulations and make sure they commit to making sure every American has health insurance through a more market-oriented approach. You can do that.
Okay.
Avik, thank you.
Sure thing.